This is part 3 of What Stanford Never Taught Me. I'm Ryan, a junior at Stanford studying human biology. Today we're going to talk about environment and particularly startups. So environment, like I've said before, is so important. It influences us to the nth degree. Who we surround ourselves with, what we interact with day to day, has very profound impacts on our chances of success and who we will become. If you surround yourself with a lot of people who are trying to constantly improve themselves, you will want to constantly improve yourself, and you will improve yourself, and over time you will have a higher chance of being successful. If we look at the environment of Stanford, we understand that there's a lot of startups going on. And this is just a prime example of how environment can change you. There are dozens of people who chase this idea of doing a startup simply because everybody else is doing it. And now I know you may think, oh, but people at Stanford, they're so smart. They would see through that kind of thing. No, they really wouldn't. Like where you have a lot of desire, a lot of envy, a lot of all these other things, all humans have those kind of emotions. And really when you get to the top levels of excellence, it's almost amplified in the fact that everybody thinks they're amazing. Everybody thinks they can do amazing things because they've gotten into a really competitive school. And so they believe that they can create the next, Google, the next Facebook, the next, best big startup. And I think it's just really interesting because the truth of the matter is, many people will fail with a startup, right? Like the statistics are just astronomically against your favor. So the fact that you would constantly be like chasing that sort of thing, maybe if that's like the thing you love, that's fine, right? But if you really aren't into that and you find yourself like, starting something like that just because the environment has influenced you, like that's a really big point where you need to step back, right? And I think that it's also just like Silicon Valley is very similar to an echo chamber in the fact that like you can have these kind of craze and like delusions that happen where things just get out of proportion because of the fact that some of the biggest companies came out of this area. People will walk around thinking that they can become the next big company, and that could be true, but it also could not be true. And oftentimes it's more likely that it's not true than it is true. Because why? Because you have all these young people with no experience who don't know anything about the world, to be honest, right? Myself included. And it's like you think you can really create a company that's going to absolutely change everything. Like it's a very, very like hard thing to kind of believe, even if you're really smart, even if you're super excellent, right? And we find that actually a lot of the really successful startups kind of come from people who tend to be a little bit older, who tend to have more experience. I asked like ChatGPT to give me an average number of years of people, that make successful startups. And typically, there are some outliers, but typically it takes almost an additional 10 years after you're like 20. So like, in your 30s or so. And why does it take that long? It's taking that long because you need to accumulate all the experience of different failures and all those different things. And I think that a lot of people at Stanford have not been, accustomed to failure in a sense because of the fact that they always chase perfection. They always believe that they need to be better and better and better, which is great. But it faces a really hard truth. Like what happens when you fail, but you were, at the top of your class in high school? Or you come to Stanford where there's so many smart people and you think that you're the best of them and you fail. It starts to really put a hole in your identity, right? And I think that's what we see in a lot of these startups is like a lot of people get really tested, battle tested to the bone. And I'm showing this as just a window into the fact that everybody in life is tested. Everybody will face failure. And it's not about if you fail, because that is something that's almost guaranteed. It's about how do you respond to that failure and how do you get back up. And those are all inherent mindset things that I've talked about they're so important how you can bounce back. And not only bounce back, but also just like keep your head on straight and not get like super depressed from failing and not make it such a huge deal and just try again and try again and try again. If you have the expectation that it's going to take a couple failures before you get a success, instead of thinking that every time it has to be right the first time, you're going to be able to last a lot longer and you're eventually going to see success because you're just going to keep trying and keep learning, right? So that's just a little bit about like startups here. Environment is just like so important, right? And that's really why I created Inner Circle. And that's why I think, it'd be very helpful for a lot of you. But yeah, if you have any questions, put in the comments below. If not, we're going to move on to the next part.